In the wake of its invasion of Ukraine, many countries have slapped sanctions on Russia. While some sanctions are aimed at banks and corporations, others are aimed at individuals, so-called oligarchs. Their assets abroad have been seized, including their super yachts that are worth millions. Who are these billionaires, and will sanctioning them stop the war? After the Soviet Union collapsed, the first president of the new Russian Federation, Boris Yeltsin, decided to privatize companies owned by the state. The 1991 economic shock therapy attempted to turn a communist economy into a free market economy. To do this, the government used a voucher scheme. Every adult and child in Russia got a voucher that could be exchanged for stakes in a newly privatized industry. This voucher privatization scheme was initially hailed as egalitarian, believed to have been designed to prevent the industries from falling into the hands of a select few, and it had massive public support. However, there was one major flaw in the scheme. People could, if they chose to do so, sell their vouchers for money. Ordinary people did not understand the actual worth of shares and were generally disinclined to invest, so they sold their coupons. People with money, and especially people with connections to the Kremlin, bought up these vouchers and eventually came to own an ever-growing piece of the pie. In a matter of months, a handful of these entrepreneurs became billionaires. All of them had ties to officials at the Kremlin, to the mob who controlled much of the black market, and ex-KGB agents who offered protection. Some of these entrepreneurs had brought hefty shares in the oil industry, while oil prices in the international market was skyrocketing due to the wars in the Middle East. Others now controlled Russia's energy, mineral, telecom, and transport sectors thanks to auctions rigged in their favor. They are the first-generation oligarchs. By 1995, the public was disillusioned with the privatization project. It had achieved exactly what it set out to avoid. The oligarchs' notoriety ballooned almost as fast as their personal fortunes. The Guardian described them as about as popular with your average Russian as a man idly burning bundles of cash outside an orphanage. But this, in all likelihood, did not bother them. The 7 richest and most influential of these Yeltsin-era oligarchs, known as the 7 bankers, controlled 50 to 70% of Russia's economy at the time and enjoyed unrivaled political power. In the years preceding the 1996 presidential election, Yeltsin's approval ratings plummeted. The privatization, combined with his idea to inject more money into the economy, led to a prolonged period of hyperinflation. The inflation that ate into the average Russian's retirement fund is thought to have been one reason for Yeltsin becoming unpopular. But it also could have been his drinking problem that by then was public knowledge. Now this was a real cause for concern for the oligarchs. Due to the growing discontent among the public, they feared that the communists who wanted to renationalize Russia's industries might come to power. So the oligarchs got together and decided to pour their money into Yeltsin's election campaign. They used TV channels and newspapers they owned to brand the Communist Party as a bunch of crazy Stalinists. This helped bump up Yeltsin's approval ratings and improve his public image, which ultimately resulted in him securing a second term. Having helped install the president, the oligarchs procured even more state assets and basically turned the country into an absolute kleptocracy where they had supreme authority. But this came to an end when Yeltsin's hand-picked successor, Vladimir Putin, took office. After winning the presidential election, he shook up the Kremlin, posting many of his friends into important offices. He even fired Yeltsin's daughter, who had been serving as advisor to the president. Through presidential decrees, he reduced the autonomy of federal districts, and by bringing the government under tighter control of the president's office, achieved a strict vertical of power. The next order of business was putting a leash on the first-generation oligarchs and the media companies they owned. The news channel NTV, owned by Vladimir Gushinsky, and the newspaper Kommersant, owned by Boris Berezovsky, had attacked Putin's fledgling government by calling it authoritarian. In May, only 2 months after the election, tax police raided Gushinsky's Mediamost company that managed NTV. Gushinsky was arrested and presented with the choice of jail time or selling his shares in NTV. He promptly sold his shares to Gazprom, the state-owned energy company, and left Russia. In 2001, Boris Berezovsky sold his shares in the news channel ORT, something he later claimed he had done under duress, and in 2006 he sold Kommersant. Berezovsky fled to the UK. Oligarchs were having to cede their political territory. Putin's reforms were a message to the oligarchs that only those who were loyal to the Kremlin would prosper. Yeltsin-era oligarchs who were willing to support the Putin administration got to keep their ill-gotten gains. Some people with personal ties to Putin became insanely rich after he assumed office, like the director of the institute where Putin obtained a degree, Vladimir Litvinenko, and his judo teacher, Arkady Rotenberg. They are the second-generation oligarchs. Rotenberg was one of the oligarchs that the US sanctioned after Russia annexed Crimea in 2014. So, do sanctions on oligarchs work?
Нет.
Sanctions on oligarchs are unlikely to dissuade Putin because he has consolidated so much power in the Russian government. Daniel Fried, the US diplomat who helped craft the US sanctions against Russia during the invasion of Crimea in 2014, once said in an interview, "He owns them absolutely. He crushed them and they exist only by his sufferance. He can jail them or kill them, and the notion that the oligarchs can assert influence over Putin is foolish." But there are reasons to think that governments around the world aren't sanctioning oligarchs merely to virtue signal to the voters. For one, it is clear that sanctions are hurting oligarchs because they hate having their favorite toys taken from them. The Russian oligarchs' lifestyle is the very peak of conspicuous consumption. There is no point in having so much wealth if you can't flaunt it on Instagram. Recently, the Russian TV host Vladimir Solovyev raged on national television about losing his luxury villas in Italy thanks to sanctions by the European Union. The West is hoping that in the long term, this unhappiness will create a wedge between the oligarchs and Putin. For now, 2 Russian oligarchs have publicly called for an end to the war in Ukraine, and Roman Abramovich has said that he would sell Chelsea FC and donate the proceeds to victims of the war in Ukraine.